From KARK4 and Fox 16, this is a special report. Here's Mitch McCoy.
And good morning to you. It is just after 10 o'clock here in Little Rock, and you're looking at Arkansas State Capitol right now in downtown Little Rock. The special session is over. Lawmakers are headed home, and the state's ban on mask mandates remain in place right now, at least for the coming hours. The issue is being heard in court right now, in fact. There is a lot of moving parts to this, and I want to get to our Jay Burr, but he's been covering every moment of this special session. Jay, good morning to you. Catch us up on what's happened overnight.
Like we said, heading into this thing, it just seemed like, when it came to the masking and some of those things, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of widespread support for it. That was obvious. The governor even kind of conceding that to a certain degree earlier in the week, saying, if there's not any legislative action, there could very well be some court action. And as you mentioned, that's going on right now. But, as we all knew, the federal PUA issue was going to sort of fly through, and that was really the only point of business this morning for either chamber. There were some resolutions and some other bills that were still kind of floating out there, but never enough support for any of those to really push those through. A lot of them were reactionary. Some of them were involved extending the session, which is something I don't think anybody really wanted to do. So really, when you kind of go back and look at it, special session kind of ho-hum, but they tend to normally be a little ho-hum, but there were some fireworks involved, obviously with some of the testimony on amending Act 1002.
So what's the next available option for, I guess, the governor, who has been adamant about giving schools local power to enact a mask mandate for kids who are not yet eligible for the vaccine? Is the governor out of options here?
I mean, there's probably some things he could do to get real creative in skirting around the state law, but I mean, he's kind of come out and said he doesn't really want to do that because it does fly in the face of the legislature. Now, really, it's going to depend on what happens with this court hearing. Do they grant any kind of injunction? Do they find that this was unconstitutional in some form or fashion? It's going to be real hard to say that it is. Because they didn't ban mask wearing altogether. It was just, banning public entities from forcing you to do that. So who knows? It obviously always depends on what judge you get. I'm sure there will be an appeal one way or the other, but it's just a matter of, what comes out of today's proceedings is kind of what I assume everybody's sort of waiting to hear from to see what the next steps could potentially be.
Jay, as you say that, we're also getting word, we got word late last night that the governor was going to be holding a media availability at 1 p.m. And this came shortly after the Little Rock mayor imposed a mask mandate in public places, appearing to defy state law because that's not possible.
Yeah, it's going to be real interesting to see the legalities of that. Now, I know there have been some Twitter going back and forthing that said, back when this was all being debated, that Senator Garner said it wouldn't necessarily affect any municipal mandates that were out there at the time. I think Fayetteville had one in place at the time, and also Little Rock. But it's pretty clear in the law that any public entity, and municipalities are public entities. Now, private businesses, they can do whatever they want. No shirt, no shoes, no service. Well, add no mask that if they so choose. But when it comes to anything state-run, publicly run, we could get into a pretty interesting debate here. But it is fascinating that Little Rock did kind of fly in the face of the legislature and went ahead and imposed something, and it was even pretty open about imposing that. So, but really, this was purely kind of coincidental because the governor's office, I reached out to them this morning, and they pretty much said, this isn't necessarily anything in response to that. I mean, I'm sure the issue is going to get brought up, but there was a lot of questions that a lot of other of us in the media that are up there quite a bit still kind of had, and wanted to at least get his reactions to some of these things, whether it be just the fact that there seemed to be no support. I know the question has come up, and even you asked yesterday of Speaker Shepard, what was all of this a big waste of time? Because you knew it wasn't going to pass, or it was going to be a very heavy lift, as he put it. And the fact of the matter is that there just wasn't a whole lot of widespread support going into this. So why bother calling everybody in to be able to debate something that doesn't stand a chance? So, I mean, those are some fair questions that I think the governor needs to answer. Now, they did add the federal PUA thing, and I think truly that was just a move to sort of save face of, okay, we came down here, we did something. Now, that was an issue that needed to be handled, but it obviously wasn't paramount to what the mask mandate was. And I think, that was a lot of the talk heading into this special session was, we're going to address masks. Well, then they just kind of slid in the federal PUA, which, again, very important issue. Don't get it twisted. That needed to be handled, as there is some litigation with that. But the masking definitely dominated the conversation up there.
Yeah, and as we're looking at this live shot from looking at the state capitol, I just kind of put two and two together, Jay, that you also see UAMS in the background there, where there are hundreds of COVID-19 patients, some of whom are fighting for their life on a ventilator, and lawmakers are headed home. At some point, one has to imagine that there will be some kind of call. And if it's not now, if it's not next week, we've heard health officials say that this virus, this Delta variant, is extremely potent. It's attacking younger people. And school is starting very soon. There's no mask mandate in place. One would think that there's going to have to be some kind of support from our state government to some of these local hospitals to help in some capacity if there's no changes to the mask mandate. That's just what that's what a lot of people are saying on social media too.
Right, and the state of emergency it's kind of the first step in doing that, because it does open up some other avenues. Now, the problem is Arkansas is not the only state dealing with a surge right now, because they're part of this interstate compact that if we need the help, other states have agreed to, we got you. Well, they're dealing with their own surges in COVID right now. And it also does loosen up some of the restrictions for, say, retired folks that have been in the medical industry that could come back and conceivably, contribute to the cause. It does make that process a whole lot easier for them to get back in. I'm not sure if it eases the restrictions or just the processes for new nurses and doctors and things like that. As you might remember, in the previous state of emergency, there was an executive order that was issued where, it waived all the initial fees, things of that nature. I'm not sure if those still took place or if you would have to issue another executive order on that. But that's kind of the first step here. And really, a lot of hospitals have even come out and said that it's not so much the physical space. The physical space is fine. They've got the means to expand in certain spots. They've got the beds there. It's just they're not staffed. And that's where the real issue is. So this is kind of becoming not so much a bed crisis, but a staffed bed crisis.
Yeah, and it appears to be growing. We saw Dr. Cam Patterson over at UAMS. He was featured in CNN saying that he's even had some nurses just walk out on the job. So Jay, we're welcoming in new viewers across the state right now. Viewers up in Northwest Arkansas, along to our south. Special session over. Mask mandate across Arkansas remains in place. And this all while this court hearing in Pulaski County is happening. where lawsuits have been filed challenging the state law. School districts calling it unconstitutional. The Little Rock School District and the Marion School District specifically, along with 2 Arkansas parents. Jay, can you speak real quick to just, I guess, how symbolic, I mean, I don't know what word to use, of a day this is, of a moment in our history this is, because you have a mayor in Little Rock who's imposed a mask mandate that legally, I guess the courts will decide if he can do because of this law. The mayor thinks he can because of a state of emergency he declared. You have lawsuits pending on this law. A judge is hearing it today, right now, in fact, and the special session just ended and lawmakers are headed home. Speak to just how rare of a day this is in our history.
Yeah, there's an awful lot going on, that is for sure, and a lot of it revolving around a lot of the same subject matter. And I think, you know, from talking with a lot of lawmakers the past couple of days, because, you know, a lot of times you think that they're just up there and they're flying their own personal opinions. Well, I mean, I talked to several of them. One senator even told me he has 9 superintendents within his district, and he'd only heard from 2 of them. And he said both of them were like, you know, we're not really in favor of this mask mandate being in place. And there was even one specifically where he told me that this one superintendent would call him for everything, always had a hot take. Well, he had to reach out to him on this matter, and he even said, it's like, man, we don't want to touch this because it's such a polarizing issue. For some reason, it's become a polarizing issue. And as we've heard from some of the testimony over the past couple of days, I mean, it's a hot butt issue, and people feel strongly about their side. And I think that's kind of where a lot of lawmakers have seen it. It's a personal choice. But the big question is where does your personal choice begin to infringe on somebody else's personal health? And I think that's where the debate kind of is right now. And again, it's going to be real interesting to see what comes of this case, because the legislature didn't necessarily ban the wearing of masks. They just banned any entity telling you that you have to, at least in a public sense. So, you know, when it comes to the constitutionality, I mean, we're going to get into the weeds when it comes to defining what that constitutionality is. And it's, you kind of almost have to look at it on the other side. You know, a lot of people tend to think that being forced to wear one is infringing upon their liberties and their freedoms. You know, the school district's kind of in that same boat. It's like, well, I mean, what liberty or, you know, what constitutional basis has been infringed upon? I mean, there are some laws in place that say, you know, school districts can't do X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of policy that's in place that, you know, schools have to do X, Y, and Z. So to me, it's just really going to be a fascinating case to see what comes out of this. And again, it always depends on what judge you get. Some are a little more liberal, some are a little more conservative, and you tend to kind of have an idea of what's going to happen. But this one completely up in the air. And even saying that with judges, I want to say this, just kind of clarify, is most of them will still look at things by the letter of the law. And even though they have kind of their own slants on things, they do a pretty good job, especially here in Pulaski County, of being fairly straight shooters. Now it gets into the interpretation of things is where we sort of differ, but you know, a lot of them tend to not let their personal opinions on things necessarily cloud their judgment, if you will. But as you said, Mitch, it's a lot of moving parts. Still, despite the session being over, lawmakers have gone back home now. But this issue far, far, far from being over.
Yeah, it is very far from being over. The special session is over. Arkansas's mask mandate ban remains in place. We have live continuing coverage on our websites throughout the day. Again, the governor speaking at 1 p.m. You can watch it right here on the device that you're watching. This has been a special report. I'm Mitch McCoy in Little Rock. Good day.